Bonsoir, good evening, and welcome to this first of the 3 screenings on Peter Gidal's work. We are very honored to have Peter Gidal here tonight. These 3 screenings are also the occasion of the presentation of a book. This book that's called Flare Out Aesthetics 1966-2016, that has 16 essays on aesthetics by Peter Gidal, and that have been edited and published at the Visible Press, edited by Mark Webber. And the book will be presented tomorrow at 8 p.m. in the lobby upstairs. So I really recommend it because there's a lot of pictures in it. And now Peter.
Stop.
Yes.
Do I need this?
Yes.
You're giving it to me?
I think so, you need it, yeah.
Okay. I'm going to speak in English, because I can speak German, but that's not going to be any better. So I'll speak English, if that's okay. Okay, I'll do, what I'm going, first of all, 4 things, I think. The first thing is I'm so pleased you're here, because in spite of doing this since 1967, and it's hard to believe, I can't get it out of my head that there's going to be 20 people, and it's very pleasing to see more than 20. I don't care if it's 50 or 200, but if it's more than 30, so I'm extremely pleased, because it takes all the stomach problems away, and because they're people, and you don't have to feel horrible. So it's just good. Neutrally said, it's good that you're here for me. Not for you maybe, but for me it's very, very good to have people. And it's something I took a long time to get used to, because the first time I came, first of all, more important, first of all I should thank Olivier because of his extraordinary generosity in inviting me with the rest of the people who run this, and to have me here. And that's number one. And for just helping getting here and settling in and all that. Actually, it's very hot. No, I'm just going to touch ground. So the second thing is, I noticed when we walked in, I'm just going to talk for 15, 20 minutes, and that's maximum. And nothing afterwards, so that way we do it all now. Well, I do it all now. The second thing is, when we walked in, just now I saw it said Vidéo, and it reminded me that the first time I came here was in 1974, invited by Jacques Ledoux to show a film called Room Film 73, which I can't remember if it's in this program at some point, on the second night or third night.
Tomorrow.
It's tomorrow. Oh, it is in, okay, so it's in the program one of the 3 nights, I suddenly forgot what's showing. And Ledoux was extremely also generous, because the films of the British at that time, and okay, something else first. The accent is American, and that makes people confused, because I've been living in London since 1968, and I'm British. But because I grew up in New York and left when I was 12 years old, which was in 1959, for reasons I can't figure out, I still have an extremely strong New York accent. So it sounds like I got off the bus yesterday from New York, but I'm actually British. So think when you hear me speaking, you're talking to someone who's British, English, from London, speaking English, not American. But I'm not. So that's number one. But anyway, the other thing was that the reason I'm saying that is because in 1974, when Ledoux invited me to show my work here, he was inviting a British filmmaker from the London Film Co-op, and that's why I had to say the thing about American, because you think, oh yes, he invited many Americans, and they showed nothing to do with that. He invited, what was radical about Ledoux at that time was that instead of just showing the usual American avant-garde, which was over and over and over shown a lot, he actually had the guts to show British Film Co-op, London Film Co-op films, first of all, and within that ideology of his, that he showed a lot of experimental film from London Film Co-op, he invited various filmmakers, of which I was one at this point. So this is all a preamble why I was here in 74. I was here in 74 because Ledoux had the interest, let's say, to show work made at the Film Co-op. And it was very, very different from any other experimental films being made, whether in the United States or in Germany or in Japan or in Spain. The Film Co-op in London had a very specific identity at that point. And it was in some ways a very extreme radical identity in terms of a theory, one of the essays of which is in that book, which is called Theory and Definition of Structural Materialist Film, which is a very mouthful, but nevertheless, it had and the other thing to say is that the films made at the Co-op were not somehow under that rubric. It was just one of the strands of the Co-op at the time, but because I was at that time running the cinema at the Co-op, and more important in terms of the Co-op, I was the treasurer, because someone had to be very, very strict about getting money, otherwise the Co-op would have disappeared. But that's a separate issue. The point was the making of the films at the Co-op was not only under this one ideology of the structural materialist aesthetic, but it was one of the strands, and that was the strand that I tried to articulate. And again, the other point to make when I say that is that when one says something like that in public, it sounds like one is saying one wrote a theoretical piece, and then one and several others made films that somehow fitted it, or were based on it, or were influenced by it, when in fact the point to be made over and over again is that theory follows practice, that the ideas come out of the work. And the work, as we know, if we make anything, whether it's a belt or a film or a painting or a shoe or whatever it happens to be, the work comes out of its own process. And it's only then, when reflecting upon the work, and when one is also critiquing one of the work in the process of making it, that the theoretical ideas somehow seem to come into place, and then the next work obliterates that, and that's when you further your theoretical work. So because of that, the important thing about that is that whenever I say I've written this essay, I don't want it to sound like, whether good or bad doesn't matter, but he thinks he wrote this essay and there were films emanating from a position from the essay. It's not like that. The essay came because certain works were being made in various ways that seemed in some ways to be articulated via a theory then. And that came after various people's film works made at the Co-op in a certain way. I should mention that there's another book out there, nothing to do with me, which Mark Webber just produced, which is called the London Film Co-op 50 Years, Shoot, Shoot, Shoot. And that has a lot of papers and works and materials and essays which in a sense back up what I'm saying, which is that there were various strands at the same time, and that the works always preceded the theoretical writing. Okay, so that's about the Co-op. That's not about me, and I'm here for me, not for the Co-op at the moment. The other thing I should say, that was number 5, I think, or 3. Anyway, so the other thing I should say is that I began making films in 1967, which seems an awful long time ago, but anyway. And one of the ones you're seeing is Clouds. The first film was made in 68, 69, and I don't just still show it because it's interesting or something. I still think it has the kind of enough in it to make it one of the films worth showing even now. And what I think is interesting in the program you're seeing, and again, when I say this, it doesn't mean what I think is good about the program. It's just what's interesting about it. It may not be good, it may be bad, whatever it is. But what's maybe of interest is the fact that, and I again found this out only by viewing my own films over the years in retrospect, is the new film, which was done 2 years ago, the one that did the L'Age d'Or prize thing, which I completely was shocked. I couldn't believe it when I heard I never got a prize. Never. You don't get prizes making my kind of work. But anyway, that was fantastic. But the point is that the Not Far at All, the last film today, is the film I made 2 years ago. And I noticed, what was I trying to say? Oh yes, I was trying to say that that there's a relation, and this is what I found interesting. Maybe not good, not bad, but interesting, is that there's a relationship between the film from 2 years ago, called Not Far at All, and the film from 1969, called Clouds. And I'm not going to start articulating what I think the relation is, but I want to say that there is a relation, which I only realized after the new film was finished. And I think that's also a rather interesting point, that one really, it's that thing about, it's a sort of Nietzsche thing, a quote, which I love, which is that I once read maybe 15, 20 years ago, long after thinking it myself, I might add, and long after many other people probably thought it, but I only read it about 15 years ago and reading his letters and essays again, and I must have missed it the first time, but the point is that whenever he said he's sometimes struck when he sees reads a work of his own, and that it strikes him as something by someone that he doesn't know, and the sentiments are sentiments that he doesn't know, and he feels he's confronted by a completely new, unknown something which he has to begin to deal with. and only then realizes it's something he himself had worked out and articulated himself. And it's exact, and it isn't about Nietzsche and me or anything like that. It's just that it's a very interesting point, because it actually is the way, certainly in my case, and I'm sure it's true of many artists, filmmakers, writers, if they're really doing, I think that's a sign of something that's actually good. If I'm almost using a moral category, which I don't usually do, but if we have to call it good or bad, it's something good for work, which is that when you do your own work and you can admit that you actually, in a very strict way, not in a funny way, but in a very strict theoretical way, that you really don't know what you're doing. You really are up against not knowing what you're doing. And you, even though you have a history, which of course means that there's a certain consistency and there's a certain overlapping of interest from one work to another, and in retrospect you can even tell often, even if you don't believe in a strong identification between the maker and the work, and intentionality, intention, which is never what is in the work, even if you have a strict position against the fact that intention produces something which can be read off as a one-to-one representation, you don't believe that at all, you still realize that in retrospect there are certain elements in someone's work that may somehow be different from the certain elements in someone else's, so that there is a trajectory of recognizable similarity in the work. And I think that's the case. I have to say, if I'm honest, usually you say these things to yourself, and in public you say, oh, I don't know. But actually, I think that's the case in my work. I think you can actually see some strands running through without them being representations of a position or adequate representations of anything. Because the point is, when you're working, you really are working blind each time again from scratch, I think. And I think it's not a kind of, almost a kind of clever way of saying one works blind and it isn't really true, but you sort of say it, because it does sound also like coherent. It's actually how you work. You finish one work and you actually don't know where to begin the next at all. You just don't know where you are. And so I think that's really interesting, that a work when it's finished can strike you as something that you don't know at all, even when it's finished. And that you have to almost look at it as if you're someone else from the maker. And for me, I have to honestly say it, even though it might be hubris and it might be somewhat egotistical, I think that's the way my works work. They certainly work that way for me. And that's why I mentioned that it might be interesting, maybe not, maybe it is, to see the last film somewhere in relation to the first film. It's a very long way of saying that. But still, I've said it now, so I can't unsay it. The other thing is that the thing that I'm most interested is, and this is the last thing I say, I think, because otherwise I haven't looked at when we started, but I'm sure it's 15 minutes or something. And I talk very fast, so it's really the equivalent of 25 minutes. And the thing I'm most interested in my own work, and in most people's work, and even in paintings and even in literature, the things I'm most interested in, the one thing is temporality, and that famous Beckett quote from his essay on Proust when he was very young, which is that death is dead if time is dead. And therefore, if you make films that obliterate, that get rid of the feeling of temporality and time passing, then the reason and that's not what I'm doing. If you make films that deny temporality and deny the passage of time, that's for the illusion that death doesn't exist. And because it's that moment of, which is most commercial film. You live in it, you don't recognize in your own being the terror and the pleasures, whatever, but also aesthetic pleasures, maybe not, but the terrors of time passing and the temporality itself. If that disappears through narrative, through identification, through all sorts of mechanisms, then it's a kind of obliteration of the fact of death, of temporality, which is that we're all running down and out eventually. And what I've always been interested in, I have no idea why, from the beginning, from the very first film, is that temporality is not annihilated, is not subtracted from the experience of viewing. And that can be both extremely frustrating, because temporality is frustrating, because the passage of time is a difficult thing to live through. And at the same time, you want to make films that aren't just statements about that thing. As I said before, they're not statements about something else, because my whole theoretical writing is against the fact that you could represent anything. You cannot represent, because if you could represent it, and if you wanted to in a film, then there's no reason for the film, because what you're representing is something that already exists. And if it already exists before you make the work, then there's absolutely no reason to make the work whatsoever. And so therefore, representation's out as a pre-definition. And okay, and so the very, very last thing I'll say is, I'm very aware in the way I speak, it sounds like a polemic or manifesto type thing. This is what it is, this is how, if you represent, and I'm totally aware that all these things are contradictions and actually impossible, because there's always the simultaneous, the fact that the camera's aimed at something, the fact that the camera is, there's no such thing as pure abstraction, that's just another illusion-like narrative. There's no pure anything, and therefore it's always a contradictory, simultaneous attempt to not represent whilst aiming your camera at something or other in the real world. It isn't a subtraction from the real, it's an attempt to not represent the real, even when it's there, in a sense. And that's the best I can say, and of course that's just me saying what I think sounds right for the work. I mean, you might think, obviously, that's my articulation of my ideal viewer as myself, but that's only that because I happen to be here. If you hadn't invited me, I wouldn't have said it here to you now. But you did, so that's your problem. And I'm just going to end with saying I'm very pleased you're here, and sorry for going on a little over 15 minutes. Okay, and thanks.